All right, we're live. Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of I Believe Now What News, where we talk about news from the Christian standpoint. If this is your first time here, that's exactly what we talk about. This is not your first time here, and you've been enjoying this content, getting updates, things of that nature. Please, highly encourage you to like, share, and subscribe. It really does help out in pushing this message. Today, we're going to talk about something. Honestly, this has not, we haven't talked about this in probably a few months since this case kind of really broke open. We did a couple videos on it if you want to reach back to the past and see anything on it. And as you can see here, it says in the title, Mica Miller's family reaches legal settlement with her husband after her controversial death. Now, this was a tragic story. If you're not familiar with it, I'll get you spun up really quick. Long story short, John Paul Miller, who is seen here in the photo, if I can get my clicker working, who's seen right here in the photo, was the husband of Mica Miller. John Paul Miller, known to be a very manipulative, mentally abusive, things of that nature type person to his wife, Mica. If you didn't know, John Paul was a pastor over in South Carolina. And honestly, he never should have been a pastor in the first place. He was married prior to marrying Mica. He was Mica's youth pastor when she was only 14 years old. When she reached of legal age, they eventually got married, and he divorced his wife for her. Long story short, and he became the head pastor of a church. I mean, how does that happen? It's honestly a very sad story, and one that is very, very preventable, because you could say if he never was a pastor in the first place, when he was should have been disqualified, maybe this never would have happened. All the more reason why pastors need to be held accountable and held to a high standard. That high standard being the standard that we see in the Bible for a leader inside the church. First Timothy chapter 3, Titus chapter 1. I say it over and over and over again on this channel. Long story short, his very manipulative and abusive ways eventually resulted in her, and I got to say this sensitively for YouTube, otherwise it does not get pushed out, but her basically game over. It was very, very sad. She did it herself, and it was honestly just a very sad story following it up. But the controversy that was really surrounding this was, number one, people are asking, did John Paul do this? When the police came back with their filings and saying that there was no evidence that he did this, that this was self-inflicted by Mica, they ended up going back and saying, his abusive relationship with her was the result. This was the result of that abusive relationship. Long story short, now it seems the family has reached a legal settlement with John Paul Miller after Mica's death. Let's go ahead and read the article. This comes from the Roy's Report. South Carolina pastor John Paul Miller and the family of his late wife, Mica Miller, reached a legal settlement on Monday. They announced in a press conference outside of Horry County Court House the settlement ends any legal jockeying over Mica's death. Mica's family, Pastor Miller, and the church have set their differences aside and allowed Mica's memory to live on without the encumbrance of contentious litigation, said Russell Lolm, John Paul Miller's lawyer. Lolm and Regina Ward, Mica's family lawyer, gave statements together at the conference explaining that they wanted to end Mica's case. That word right there, in April, captured national attention after the family alleged that her husband abused her, and Mica feared for her life. Mica, age 30, died at the Lumber River State Park in North Carolina. Local authorities ruled her death, that word right there. Roy's Report previously reported she and her husband served as pastor, her husband who serves as pastor at Solid Rock Church in Market Common in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, had initiated the divorce proceedings shortly before her death. So long story short, this was just honestly something very, very tragic. I hope the family feels a little bit more at peace now than maybe they were feeling before. Regardless of what happened, nothing is going to replace the fact that their daughter is gone. Once again, I truly believe that this was something that was very preventable, because once again, this man was not qualified to be a pastor. He had divorced his wife in the past for a woman that he was teaching in his youth group. There were also other reports that he was seen down in, I believe it was Charleston, South Carolina, while he was still married to Micah with another woman. Multiple things wrong. And I've listened to a few of this man's messages, and honestly, they are very, very disturbing. He wasn't even a good teaching pastor whatsoever, never should have been a pastor. And sadly, what the crazy thing is out of all of this man is still a pastor. This man is still the pastor of that church. I believe the article does address this. John Paul Miller does remain the pastor, but was released from ministerial functions shortly after Micah's death for a quote, time of healing, counsel, and guidance. And this was honestly truly sad because what more do obviously, he was disqualified from all the things that he did in this past. But now all this stuff happens. A pastor must have his household in good order, things of that nature. Obviously, that's not the case. I don't get it. When it was reached out, we talked about this in previous episodes to that kind of church's, I guess you would say, overseer. He said he would not release him from his pastoral duties unless God told him so. When he was asked that, that's what he said. He's like, why haven't you released him? Why haven't you relieved him as a pastor? He's like, oh, because God didn't tell me so. He is not qualified by scripture. Once again, go to the Bible, very plain what the qualifications for a pastor are. The art continues on that the pastor had blamed Micah's family for withholding medication that kept her mentally stable, while the family claimed his abusive behavior drove the 30-year-old to end that sadly her time on this earth. At the press conference, John Paul Miller, Micah's relatives, the Francis family, and their lawyers met for what was anticipated to be an estate hearing. Instead, the parties announced that the agreement was made to stop all legal filings. That includes the previous petition by Sierra Francis, Micah's sister, become the special administrator of her state. Sierra Francis withdrew her petition. John Paul Miller will now be the personal representative of the estate, the attorney said. Additionally, the agreement bars Micah's family from pursuing any civil wrong death lawsuits against the 44-year-old John Paul Miller, which the attorney Ward had previously said the family was considering, because once again, they believe that he pushed her into doing this. Ward noted that some people may be disappointed, quote, disappointed by this conclusion, but without this agreement, the litigation could take years to go through a court system. Honestly, and this is just my personal opinion, I believe the family wanted closure. We do not want the Francis family or anyone to be dragged through litigation for years, Ward said. We want to put this behind us and move to the next chapter of the matters. When we say that we have gotten justice for Micah as a result of the settlement, it is true, they are saying. Micah's family doesn't want to talk about Mr. Miller anymore, Ward added, and I can rightfully understand why. Instead, they want to work to pass a law in Micah's memory that bans coercive control abuse. Coercive control is a behavior or action used by a perpetrator to frighten, threaten, and oppress a victim, according to a domestic violence network. Ward, who previously pushed for a bill on this, explained the law could, quote, bar physical warfare that damages, quote, the very soul of a person, or psychological. I said physical, apologies. The next chapter is to go and convince our General Assembly to take a look at the coercive control law bill. We need that on the agenda ASAP, Ward said. We want to focus on the memory and the beauty of Micah and everything she has represented for herself and every single person that has ever been in her situation. The lawyers additionally also urged people to stop protests. We have a comment over here from Chrislin, and I think this is actually right. You know, incredibly quick settlement, very unusual. Once again, like the article did say, they went in there for an estate hearing. They came out with a basically a settlement, and everything's over. Like it said in the comments here, you know, this may enrage some people, especially people who wanted to see justice for Micah, but at the same time, the court went through their hearings. The family is the one ultimately who would get the restitution, and this is what the family agreed to. And so we have to honor that. So in what this next section says here, lawyers urged to stop protests. Both lawyers called on protesters. So both lawyers called on protesters to stop demonstrations outside of Solid Rock Church. Those that are spending every Sunday morning protesting outside of Solid Rock Church, chanting justice for Micah, should recognize this time of healing and move on with their lives, Attorney Lone said. We don't know every piece of information that led to the death of Micah. We do know that her life did serve a purpose. Her life mattered. Loln's remarks reference months of protest outside the church urging justice for Micah, the Roy's report reported. Earlier in July, one church member faced assault charges after using a sprinkler to spray protesters outside of the building. Loln encouraged protesters to leave Solid Rock Church goers alone. Honestly, this shouldn't even be a church, in my opinion. If you go once again and look back at them and just the fact that they affirmed a pastor with the past that John Paul Miller had, this church probably does not stand on a solid rock, but rather stands on shaking ground and shifting sand. I hope the people inside that church go to a good church with good leaders, good elders, good pastors, good members that can point them in the proper direction. And ultimately, Christ grabs a hold of their heart and opens up their eyes, if their eyes are not opened already, to the truth that is inside the gospel. Because pastors are not supposed to be like John Paul Miller. These poor people are just trying to go to church on Sunday, and they're being harassed and they're being put in fear. They continue saying, and they're being made not to feel comfortable trying to go to church. Lone said the Francis family just asked them through their attorney to focus their energy on something else. She asked for them to focus on their energy towards the passing of this coercive control act. Ward, who has a quote, justice for Micah banner outside her office, echoed Lone's remarks. Loln also noted that he doesn't believe JPM is under any criminal investigation. We asked for definitive answers on that, and the answers and or lack thereof answers that we received can only lead to that answer, Loln said. So it seems like there's still a little bit of ambiguity in this, but I guess that's basically what they're saying. Later that month, local law enforcement investigating Mica Miller's death reached out to the FBI in South Carolina and the United States Attorney's Office for help with the case, the Roy's report reported. Linda Burgess comments, I'm sure he's all broken up. And sadly, I could tell you're being sarcastic with that. Not sadly that you're sarcastic. You're rightfully so to be sarcastic in that comment, because it didn't seem like JPM honestly cared too much about his wife. Like I said, he was caught down in Charleston, South Carolina with another woman, allegedly, I got to make sure I say that, allegedly, for something else that was going on down there while his wife was away doing the act that ultimately ended her time here on this earth. It's just honestly a sad story. And once again, the thing that just keeps coming up in my mind, why was this man a pastor? Why is this man still considered a pastor? I know who he's not a pastor in the eyes of, and that's in the eyes of God. I feel very confident in saying that. The contention surrounding Mica Miller's death. Mica Miller's death began, this is just kind of a little bit of a background, which we already went over. So I'm not going to go too much in depth with it, but I wanted to give you this update because I know this was something we were covering a few months ago and a lot of people had questions about it. It looks like this is at an end for now, as the family had reached that legal settlement with JPM, and that side is pretty much done. The only thing I think that left could possibly happen is if there is an official investigation going on that the attorneys don't know about yet, and they are going to springboard something eventually on him. That we don't know. So that's the only other thing I think that can really come out of this. Now, there was no talks about what the settlement was, or at least none that I was able to find and see. So we don't know what the settlement included. Obviously, it looked like JPM is still going to retain control of the estate, which the family originally wanted. Who knows why it went in that direction? I honestly don't. But this was once again just an update from what was going on. A little bit of cross chatter in over here. Observation station always being commenting, and I love it. It put hi Linda over to Linda Burgess. But thank you so much, y'all, for listening to this. This is a really short one, but I just wanted to give you once again an update on what was going on with this, since this was something that we were covering some months back, because I always do want to try to follow up with things. All right, besides that, y'all have a wonderful day. Remember, Christ is king. God is in control. We may question things that happen here on this earth, but ultimately, sometimes we just see the tree and we don't see the forest there, but we can trust that God knows the forest for the trees, because he is the one who planted the forest. All right. I'll go ahead and talk to y'all later. I love y'all, and I'll see y'all on the next one.